Hi, Next Economy Now listeners. In celebration of our second cohort of Next Economy Living beginning this October, we're launching a special mini-series on the podcast to explore ways to build our individual and collective resilience strategies during these critical times. If you enjoy this episode and are excited about designing your life in alignment with your values in a supportive community environment, consider joining our fall cohort of Next Economy Living. In this 6-month learning journey, we'll learn how to deepen our security and resilience practices to thrive and flourish amidst ecological and economic challenges. Learn more and sign up for a free coffee chat with one of our facilitators at bit.ly/Next Economy Living.
Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Autumn Brown for the third time. To have you back. Welcome back, Autumn.
Thank you. OG guest.
OG guest. Autumn is a mother, movement leader, and musician whose organizing work is rooted in Black feminist and fugitive freedom movements. She has spent over 20 years organizing for healing justice, facilitating movement strategy, and training organizers in consensus process, facilitation, and racial justice. Autumn is a 2020 Auburn Seminary Lives of Commitment honoree and recipient of the 2025 Margaret Brent Award. She co-hosts a podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, and lives on Dakota land in Minneapolis, where she is working on a book about fugitive practice. Interesting. A book about fugitive practice. Welcome back, Autumn.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into the book in a minute, but I want to start off with a question of what is bringing you joy right now?
Well, I alluded to this before we started recording, but today is my oldest child's birthday, and he is 17 years old today. And what an enormous privilege it is to live long enough to watch our kids get older. It is like the greatest joy / most important work of my life to be a parent. And so just the celebration of him is bringing me a lot of joy, both on the big scale, but also the small scale of, it's stressful because I'm putting together a party and I'm having to run all these errands, but there's some like gleeful, joyful energy that I'm feeling inside of the stress because it's all in service of celebrating my child. So that is bringing me a lot of joy just right now today.
Wow. 17, mother of dragons.
17, mother of dragons, exactly. Truly, and they are. There's 3 of them, and they are dragons. They're all very, very strong, very intense people.
Yeah.
I know that you're the interviewer, but I would love to hear what's bringing you joy.
Sure.
Right now.
Yeah, we can do back and forth for this,
Why not?
For this podcast.
3rd time's the charm.
Yeah. I think what's bringing me joy is also kids. However, so I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they are currently with my parents in Yosemite doing a little like grandparent week for 5 days.
God, yes.
And so what's bringing me joy is not having my kids around. And I'm sorry to my kids if they ever listen to this in the future.
Oh, listen. May it be so that they will listen to it when they're old enough to understand why that would be joyful.
My wife and I were like, are we bad people because we like not having our kids around? We're like, nah, we're not bad people. This is so normal.
Oh, my God. You have to have breaks from them. Otherwise, you would just want to kill them all the time.
Yeah. Totally. It's like the absence makes the heart grow fonder platitude. It does. I feel like it does, especially with kids.
It does. Well, and especially, I think about this all the time. Even though I'm a single mom and I really enjoy I enjoy the element of single motherhood that is like, I have my own house and I'm the one in charge of it. Even though that is true, I also recognize that the whole way that we raise children in American society is like just so upside down. Just the fact that we're all living in single family homes for the most part, and that it's, either one or two adults typically trying to take care of all of the needs of a child or multiple children. And I think that's part of the setup that creates the conditions in which we need breaks from our kids. Like if we had more of a village style environment that we were raising kids in, we wouldn't feel the need for a break so much because we wouldn't be so overloaded with responsibility. And so I always think about that when I'm feeling that, like, wow, I'm really dropping my kids off at their dad's house and being like, goodbye. And then, I have that twinge of guilt. And then I'm like, it's not my fault that things are like this. I'm such a better mom because of those moments where I get to just breathe and rest down and remember myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Remembering that. Yeah. It's like when we invite family or friends over, it's like there's more people, but less work for everyone, right? Sort of that community. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, well, maybe actually before we jump into some of the, so just for framing this for folks who are listening, Autumn and I have talked over the years, we did a podcast on, I think it was anti-oppressive facilitation. We did, it was maybe our first one. Mm-hmm. We did another one on, I think it was like solidarity economy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And cooperatives.
Really, yep. Bringing back the memories. And then
what
over
did we
the
talk about?
The things, the solidarity things.
Yeah, the things.
And so today we just have some like juicier big picture questions that we're wrestling with. So this is maybe a listener's insight into just two, colleagues sort of like going into like some of these big picture issues that we don't actually know the answer to, but are up for a lot of us right now. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking before we segue into some of those big pictures, maybe you could give Autumn just like, I know you're doing music now, and like maybe bring folks like up to speed the last like maybe 2 years or year or two of like, you've moved on from aorta and you're and sort of like, yeah. So maybe just like, what have you been working on?
Sure. Yeah. Because so when you and I met, Ryan, I was a worker owner at the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance, aorta. And yeah, I was for many years, I was in leadership in a worker-owned cooperative. And I would say my whole career has really been focused on figuring out how we practice democracy in our lives, in our day-to-day lives, whether it's in the workplace or in the family or in community. And something did happen for me in the last 2 years where I took a year-long sabbatical away from aorta. And inside of that year, I really turned my life ship. I started the process of turning the ship of my life and turning it towards art. I am an artist. I've always been an artist. I'm a musician. I'm a writer. And inside of that time period, inside of that year, I recorded 2 EPs and within the next year released both of them into the world with my band. And then I also realized that I had reached a point in my vocational commitment to justice. I had reached a point where it was time for me to shift away from direct work in the field towards transmission of ideas and frameworks and ways of being. So I left aorta at the end of last year, and I've been really focusing on this book on fugitivity, fugitive practice. I've been focused on making art, and I am still hosting the podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, which just continues to be one of my most inspiring areas of life work also. And the conversations that I'm getting to have inside of that space have been so inspiring for me, especially during this time, the last season, which we just wrapped, the episode that we're releasing this week is going to be the last episode of our season. This last season has all been focused on solidarity and the politics of solidarity, the practice of solidarity, how we actually build movement across political difference. And it has been real medicine for me in this time, real medicine for me. So that's really what I've been focused on, reimagining. And part of that has involved kind of reimagining, how do I earn money and how do I continue to be the source of financial stability for myself and my children as I need to be, while shifting in my life and career towards a different phase of career. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. I know that, for example, your music has been going, like, I feel like you're very much vibing on like the music side with your band and things like that. Yeah.
Oh man, it's giving me so much life. I have to say, if I could just do music all the time, I'd be such a happy little camper. In addition to my own
Were you
band,
trained in music or anything younger?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I studied music pretty intensively. And I mean, it's funny, we all have our own weird stories as how we end up in the careers that we end up in. But it's funny to look back and know that when I was going off to college, my expectation of my life is that I was going to be a professional actor and musician. That was what I was going to school for. That was the life that I had imagined for myself. So I am classically trained in all of those fun things. But I took a really big, long detour away from making art because I got caught up in the beauty of organizing. And anyone who's been an organizer, a community organizer at any scale, knows it is such a consuming way to be in the world. It's all consuming. And so there were many years of my life where it felt like I couldn't be both an artist and an organizer. And now I'm in a lot more of an integrated state. I'm also doing far less organizing work. Everything feels right on time. I also feel like now that I'm living into my singer-songwriter avatar, I feel like, well, now I actually have things to write about. When I was in my early 20s, nothing against artists who launch in their teens and early 20s, but I have a lot more substantial life experience to draw on now as a musician. So it feels right on time.
Yeah. And I mean, you were also raising kids too. That probably helped take away from the music or art.
Truly. And it's funny, I was talking to someone recently they were reading a book about goal setting or something. And they were like, yeah, in this book, it says that like you should only have like 5 goals at most at a time. And so like whatever you're working on, like you make your list of things and then you strike through, narrow it down until you have just 5. And I was like, whoa, 5 sounds like a lot to me because I'm like such a hyper-focused person. So for me, I would only ever want to have like 1 to 3 big goals that I'm working on at a time because of the way I pour into whatever it is that I do. And so I think that was an element, right? That, once I was in parenting, I was like, I'm parenting, I'm organizing. Okay, I'm parenting and I'm executive directing this organization. Okay, I'm parenting and I'm being a worker owner of this, and I mean, that feels like a very full life to me. Like, parenting plus podcast plus job, that feels like a lot. So for me, there has been that element of really being clear about if I really take my art seriously, and if I take seriously that the thing that is channeling through me and needs to come into the world is transformative and is going to be important for other people, that it deserves a lot of my attention. Not a little bit, but a lot of my attention, which means saying no to other things, So I've been, I'm 41 going on 42. So I'm also in that like midlife period that is the way I've been talking to people about it is like, and may it be so, I'm entering the second half of my life. And that is meaningful to me in a whole variety of ways, including I'm no longer in the place of like, I'm throwing it all up in the air and seeing what lands. I think that comes around again in the 60s. But right now I'm in the place of, I really know who I am and I really know what it is that I'm meant to do at this time. And I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to feel drawn in a whole bunch of different directions or pulled by other people's energy and expectations. Like I just am going to do the thing that I know I'm meant to do. And then I'll, when I'm 65, I'll probably like go to graduate school for theology. Do you know?
Totally. Become a Christian mystic. And like
exactly. That's the future.
Well, what if we turn to some of these juicy questions?
Let's do it.
So I may be combining a little bit of a couple here, but so we had 2020, Black Lives Matter.
We had it.
George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. We had the movement, the motion. I remember I did a podcast with Resma Minicum, and he
also based in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Minneapolis representing on the podcast. And he said, we are never going back to normal on that podcast. It was like 2020. Yeah. And I was like, I believe you.
Yeah, he was right about
and
that.
I don't think it's normal now, but I don't think he anticipated the backlash. So I guess my question is like, what does where we are now say about what we either got wrong and like should have anticipated, or is it more like we got it mostly right and it was just like inevitable that there was going to be a movement cycle that like came back around, backlash or something? And yeah, like how are you sitting with like what's happening now politically, US, but also in different places versus like what happened in the like last 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'll channel James Baldwin a little bit and say, I think another way of framing the question or thinking about it is, what does what's happening right now say about who we are as people?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, certainly there's a way of looking at it through the lens of movement success or movement failure. But I think on a longer scale of time, what we're living through in this moment, I think, has a lot more to do with some of the more deep truths of the human experience. And I don't mean to say deeper truths that are bad truths or things that are scary about us. So I think, for instance, humans long to feel a sense of belonging and are so confused about how to experience it. And there's a set of traps that we fall into pretty easily in that search for belonging. And one of the traps is believing that our belonging is sourced from us versus them. And I think that, not to put too fine a point on it, but what part of what we're experiencing on the left is our trap, our us versus them trap. Anyone who listens to my podcast will know that this is how I feel about it. This is not a fresh thought. This is just the position that I take. It is just often the case that people who are organizing for social change forget that they are deeply a part of the system that they are trying to change, and that anything about that system that they find problematic lives inside of them. And so, as an example, on the left, we have a really problematic tendency to treat people who disagree with us as though they are stupid and evil. And that is a really dangerous set of beliefs to hold about other people. It's both dangerous because it's toxic to, if I'm walking around through the world thinking that there's a whole group of people out there who are stupid and evil, it says a lot more about me than it says about those people. It's a toxic belief system to have. It's also dangerous because it's not strategic. It's just not a strategic way to orient to what's happening in the world. If I believe that people who have enormous political power are stupid, then I'm not going to relate to their strategy. I'm not going to even see or notice what their strategy is. So, there's I hope for everyone on the left, I hope for everyone that this produces, that what we are in right now provokes a moment of immense soul searching of who are we called to be? What kind of movement leaders do we need to call forward? What kind of organizers do we need? What kind of people do we need to be developing? And what kind of people do we need to be developing ourselves into? It's a spiritual practice, right? It's like not intellectual, I don't think. It's a spiritual practice that's about really looking at ourselves and saying, we are equally responsible for these conditions. We're equally responsible for these political conditions. And so long as we relate to ourselves as the victim of stupid, evil people, we will continue to find ourselves in circumstances where we're not winning and we don't know how and we don't know why. And we're like, what's happening? Why isn't it working? Well, it's not working because our strategy is not working. We're not winning because we don't have a good strategy in place. But part of why we don't have a good strategy in place is I think that the soul work that needs to be happening inside of people is not necessarily happening. That us versus them is inherently hierarchical, right? It creates both a hierarchy of like whose needs are going to get met, a hierarchy of whose ideas are right and wrong. I'm not saying this to say like there's people, who support Trump whose ideas are really great, actually. Like I'm not arguing for a both sidesism.
Yeah.
What I'm arguing for is all of us need to be able to look at the conditions as they are and then drop down to a deeper level of awareness of our responsibility for them. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, like one of the things I noticed, I love, by the way, the reframe with James Baldwin quote. It's like, oh, wow, she's a facilitator and a podcaster. She knows how to reset this question. Beautiful.
Well, I've also been studying his work a lot lately. Yeah. So it's just like in my brain.
I love it. Yeah. Like I think one of the things that I personally feel like I could have done better in this sort of like last few years has been, I think my own journey around like racial equity and understanding whiteness and things. It like initially was judging other white people for not being radical enough, not understanding, the Black experience, always centering whiteness, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I came with like this very judgmental energy of like, you're a fucking idiot if you don't get this. Like, right. I mean, it's like the canceling energy. And I feel like when there's momentum on our side, like after, May 2020, it's easier to like rely on that as a strategy because there's so much momentum towards like, we need to change things. And like these people need to just get it. Like they're wrong.
Get on board or you'll be left behind. Yeah,
exactly. Mm-hmm. Like businesses, you need to create a fund for like Black entrepreneurs, like 100, like you need to do all these things and like do it now or you're going to miss out. Like the whole thing is changing. And so I think part of the backlash is the people feeling like you were never really about me. I'm talking more about like moderate voters and maybe like right-wing folks. It's like you were only doing this thing when you had power on the left, like towards us. Like you were sort of like using your power to like force change and not like meeting us with like maybe the energy of like acceptance or like bridging, like John Powell, like type bridging energy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like some of the reaction is people feeling like when you had the momentum and power, you just said like, fuck you, we're going to steamroll you with like this way of being, like you just need to get on board. And not everyone was doing that, but I'm just saying from my own, like that's definitely how I was rolling. And now I'm realizing like if I were to say a silver lining of this blowback and like this moment is like, oh, like we actually need to include more people who don't agree with us in the like process of change. Otherwise it will just not be sustainable. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love the point that you're making because it's the get on board or you'll be left behind, that sort of momentum based change can often be so hollow, as evidenced by what we're currently seeing, right? You see Target as a corporation swing from, whatever their investment strategy was and all of their DEI programming and all the things to as soon as the political winds change, they swing clear in the other direction because it's the same thing. It's okay, the momentum has shifted in a different direction and now we have to get on board with that because there hasn't been meaningful internal again, soul level shifting that's happened. And I think, we've seen a lot of surface level symbolic change. And we've seen it both at the scale of national and international governance. And we also see it, I think, inside of movement spaces as well. Even the sort of like things that I would consider to be progress, like the sort of like universal deployment of like now everyone introduces themselves with pronouns. Like that's a positive thing. It's also highly symbolic. A lot of people are doing that without understanding why it's important. They're just doing it because they know that they're quote unquote supposed to, right? And when you have social change relying on symbolic and not deeply understood actions, that sets us up for failures that we can't anticipate, right? Because we think everyone's on board, because everyone is symbolically engaging in the same actions. And then you have a political moment like the election last year, and it reveals where people actually are, right? It reveals like how much of what was happening was performance, and both what people's actual belief systems are and also what the political system can actually hold at that time, right? Because of course, the number of people who vote in the national election is not representative of how people actually think and feel across the country, all the things like, and also it's like, oh, this is a good barometer right now for what our political system can actually affect. And so it's beautiful that we have lots of people using pronouns. But if we have a lot of people using pronouns performatively, symbolically, and it's not actually coming from like a deeply rooted liberatory politic that's about saying there is a way of being in this world that exists beyond the construct of gender, it's actually not as meaningful as we think it is, or it doesn't mean what we think it means, and then it sets us up for believing that there's political alignment where it doesn't exist, or believing that there's political solidarity where it hasn't been actually created, And then you have a lot of people walking around feeling kind of resentful of each other, And that's just not good fodder for movement. So we've got a lot of people organizing right now, and they're organizing from a seat of resentment. They're organizing from a seat of hatred. They're organizing from a seat of fear and catastrophic thinking. And those are short-term motivators. We need people organizing from a seat of loving practice. We need people organizing from a seat of courage. We need people organizing from a seat of grief, right? Like those are energies that we're actually drawing on something that refills and refills and refills, It's like endless. Love is endless. Grief is endless. You know what I mean? Courage is endless. Those are things that you can't tap out of love. You can't run out of courage. I really believe you cannot run out of those things. Or you can't run dry if that's the thing that is feeding the work that you're doing.
I'm so glad you mentioning this, especially around like the pronouns thing. I think on our other podcast, we have one for the B Corp world called Beyond the Bee. And I was telling someone, an Indigenous woman, a story of like, I had on my email signature for a while. It's like, I live on unceded Coast Miwok land at the bottom of my email. And my brother had asked me, he's like, because he's a liberal guy and based in like Northern California. He's like, what is that? What are you trying to do with that, really? And I was like, well, I'm trying to acknowledge Indigenous folks are still here. And he's like, well, do you have any relationship with them? And I was like, no, and so he was like, well, that's kind of like, I just don't know what you're trying to do. And I had to actually look at myself and be like, wow, I have this on here because it feels like I want to project that I'm like a white person who gets it. Right.
Yeah. Totally.
And like him was like another thing. And so, but I have like no connection to those things. It's not no connection, but it's like, it's not like rooted deeply in me. It's more like I'm doing this because I think like I need to do it in order to be accepted in left spaces.
Totally. And I'm not saying that we don't get a lot of culture change through that peer pressure. We can change a lot through peer pressure, right? Again, I'm not coming in from it's like universally good or universally bad. And I want to be really clear to the audience who's listening. I'm not arguing that people should like stop using pronouns when they introduce themselves.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we cannot continue walking around thinking that is change, right? Those symbolic Again, not symbolic in a bad way, but symbolic truly as like those are symbols that we uphold to indicate something, right? But, it's not an indicator that the systemic conditions have actually changed, right? So, one of the things that I've been working on a lot in my book project is really encouraging people to think about how we relate to power and how we relate to the idea of like reaching for governing power. Because I think that one of the struggles that we're having, and this is a struggle that makes a lot of sense to me, we've been inside of a several 100-year-long cycle of being inside of a political system that truly relies, it's not just that it is oppressive, it relies on oppression to function, right? Which is, I think, an important distinction. It's not like we're in a political system where oppression happens and it's bad. It's like we're in a political system that requires debt. It requires exploitation. Like those are core requirements of the system's functioning. So within a dynamic like that, a lot of what's getting produced is victims. So then we get this distorted reality. Fast forward 500 years of this particular iteration of it. We have this distorted reality now where we have a lot of people who are like, really in a lineage of victimization and really attached to that as a core part of identity. And if you're really attached to your lineage of victimization, the last thing that you would want is to be a person who has power. In a system like this that requires oppression to function, like you don't want to be someone who has power because that looks like I'm the deliverer of the evil bad thing, And so I think we have to reckon with that if we're going to reach for governing power, which is what is required like right now. If we have any hope of rescuing a majority of humans on Earth, which I think is what the goal is, it's not everyone's goal, right? As we know, like there's.
Did you say the majority of humans?
The majority of humans on Earth.
Oh, yeah.
There's some people, we know this now, right? There are some people whose goal is to hasten the climate catastrophe because that's a part of their religious ideology, right? That the climate catastrophe will bring about end times and that's the goal. And we actually want a majority of humans on Earth to perish because that's going to bring about the coming of Jesus. And so it's like, there are people, it's not a majority of people, but there's a powerful minority of people who really do want that. But I think the vast majority of humans want the vast majority of humans to live. And so if we have any hope of affecting that outcome, we actually do have to reach for governing power. And that I think is really hard for us. It's like hard from a position where we critique the system. And where we are suspicious of power, rightly suspicious, it is really hard to reach for power.
And it just reminds me of the importance of your facilitation, coalition building, like just how to have difficult conversation, like how to talk to each other even before you even get to political power, right? It's just
right.
Like, how do you even like have a disagreement? Like we're not even taught these things. And it's
totally, yeah, right. It's like, how do we work things out in a way that is not increasing harm? Because we do have to, we're not going to be able to mitigate all of the harm. But in order to move in formation together inside of this political moment, we do have to be able to like trust that we can come up against something really difficult and stay in it together, stay in it with each other.
Yeah. I think for me, sometimes using like a nitty-gritty example helps me or maybe others touch on some of the concepts that I love sort of where you're going. Like one example is there's some people I know in the South who are trying to organize and like around business for good or like just kind of like trying to do some of the like organizing and coalition building. And, I think one of the challenges on the left is like, some of the language that we use in the more progressive zones, like, for example, around a gender identity or, even the term BIPOC, which like some Black folks are like, I don't use that term, or like,
right.
It's
like,
can be
what is that?
Yeah. So it's kind of like in the left, we're kind of steeped in like, you actually have to use the right language to describe and like have you read Alexis Pauline Gumbs on fugitivity to like be accepted at
Totally.
some of this stuff. And so what those folks I've spoken with have said things like, if I come in and say, my name is blah, 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 I use he, him pronouns, and I'm on unceded blank land, like I might lose people immediately. So I guess my question for you is like, how do you think through like the big tent? Like what are the, in organizing, it's like, how do we focus on the things we share as opposed to all the things we don't share? Because if you focus on the things we share, it can like build bridges.
Mm-hmm.
And on the left, we tend to have very firm beliefs, especially in the like progressive left in like big cities and like, well-educated left, like how you should talk and like things that you should do in a certain way.
Yeah.
And like, how does that match up with like the reality that if we talk about things in certain ways, we might actually lose people that we're trying to build. But then we also feel like if we don't use pronouns or land acknowledgements, we're also not being authentic to like indigenous folks or LGBT,
It's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
It's extremely complicated. Yeah.
We're getting straight into the deep stuff.
No, we are. I mean, and this is what we have to be figuring out on the left.
Yeah.
It is what we have to be figuring out. I guess I'll start with the last part of your question, which is like, how do I think about the sort of like, I think you said big tent sort of.
Yeah. Like, how do you choose which areas to like, I'm not compromising on this because it's something that's like so core that even if I lose people, which I might because of that issue, I'm still not going to compromise on it.
Right.
How do you choose those things?
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because, for instance, in my dojo, where I train in Aikido, we have a practice where we introduce ourselves at the end of every class. If we have new people on the mat, we always introduce ourselves in a circle and we always use pronouns. And that is a turnoff sometimes for new students. And we have had people who will come to our dojo, try it out. They'll be like loving everything that's happening. And then they hear that happen at the end and they're like, fuck you guys, I'm out. But for us, we have developed a community of practice where we have an expectation because of the nature of what we do in that space. We're interacting with each other's bodies. We are practicing aggression and violence and neutralizing aggression and violence. It's very physical. It's very intimate, which means that consent and safety are like highest priority. Consent and physical safety are highest priority, which is why in that space, it's very important that people understand how people in the space relate from a gender orient or a gender spectrum perspective, right? Like we even literally have our changing rooms in our dojo labeled in a particular way, right? And so that's an environment, for instance, in which I don't care if we lose people because we use pronouns, because for that community of practice, it's a necessity for our safety in order to have it. But that's not true in all settings. And I think that to me, the distinction of understanding where is something a requirement for safety versus where does it become something that's just purely symbolic that we're using as a marker to know whether you're in or out of the in-group. It's that kind of distinction that I think becomes really important. Because if I'm in the dojo, pronouns really matter. If I'm in a coalition space where I'm intentionally trying to build political community across difference, then I want to bring people in and then do the consciousness raising work with folks to bring them into an awareness of why that would matter, rather than using it as like a litmus test of whether they can be a part of the coalition or not. And so to me, that's the kind of distinction where it's like in some spaces, it's a necessity for safety. In other spaces, it should be a part of our political education, not a requirement for entry.
I love it. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense in the two spaces you identify. I think it's all of our work of like, what is the distinction between those? Or like, how do you find it? Because I think some people have argued to me, like, no one's going to argue if you say we want clean water, we want to have our families safe, we want to have, good, education, or like sort of like, I don't know. There's just a lot of, I would say, discussion about like just like how do we frame things in ways that are, that everyone can get behind.
Yeah. And I think that this is the thing that I find really interesting, because I'm like, when people raise that concern of like, well, how do we frame things in a way that everyone can get behind? I'm like, what everyone are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there is a way that we get, who are you talking about? You're talking about people that don't politically agree with you, right? Which means your strategy has to be different, right? So like, if I'm trying to organize one of my uncles in South Carolina who has no context for the gender binary conversation, I'm not starting from, here's why pronouns matter. Or I'm not starting from the place of like, you need to just understand and respect this in order for us to be able to have a conversation. That's not my starting point. It can't be my starting point. It can't be the litmus test. In fact, I would argue that if I'm trying to organize with someone who's that far away from me on the political spectrum, I can't have a litmus test, right? Because that's not the nature of the relationship. It's like, I have to begin from the place of like, there's critical differences in how we understand the world. Where do we find common ground? What do we value? And what are the conversations that we need to be able to have? Where do we have to have a shared understanding in order to be able to move in political formation, right? So one of the things that we know right now about what's happening on the left, quote unquote, but in the political spectrum writ large, is that we are going to have to build a much broader coalition, which means organizing with people that we know don't agree with us. And in order to do that, we have to be in practices that help us figure out what we do agree on and align around, and what are we willing to compromise on so that we can actually work together, right? And that means that we can't rigidly hold to cultural notions of right and wrong, right? And again, it's not value judgment here. Our current ways that we talk about gender, even quote unquote liberatory ways that we talk about gender on the left, this is all very, very fresh. I love to remind people of this, that even the term heterosexuality is a very recent term in the history of language. And it originates in the late 1800s as a way to refer to a medical condition that is like a morbid fascination with people of the opposite sex. So it originates as a way of talking about a disease. It's only like in the 1930s that it gains this like popular orientation of like normal, healthy sexuality. So heterosexuality as a term has only been used in the way it's being used for the last 100 years. Pronouns, way shorter time scale than that. You know what I mean? Like all of these things are on their own much bigger timelines. So it is just not strategic for us to hold to rigid ideas about language or rigid ideas about our culture, knowing that in the grand scheme, 100 years from now, people are going to be on some new shit that would make us feel like we are, sorry, I'm kind of running around here, but like even between me and my children, right? Like I have a child who, one of my children changed her name, not because of a desire to change her gender, but just because she wanted to change her name. When she did this, my first reaction was, you can't do that because you're co-opting trans identity. You're basically co-opting something that trans people are doing and acting like you get to do it too. And she looked at me and she was like, I get to change my name because it's mine. And I had to check myself because here I am accusing my kid of cultural co-optation. She's on some new shit where she's like, no, I'm free. I can change my name because it's my name. That's why I'm changing it. And I was like, yeah, right? So 3 generations from now, I can't even imagine what freedom practices my kids' will have come up with. So it doesn't behoove me, and it's not strategic for me to have a rigid orientation to this cultural moment or this language. So again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using pronouns. I love using pronouns. I'm just saying that like it's the rigidity really that is the issue, that is preventing us from being able to actually build real, meaningful political community. Yeah.
Yeah. This Indigenous woman I was speaking to on the other podcast was saying has to be relational. So there has to be like the relational component to the other person or to pronouns or to the land and indigenous stewardship, et cetera. Like what we're lacking right now is like the relational components to all these things.
Yes, absolutely.
And so it makes it feel like the change can be hollow because there's no like relational like mycelium connecting, all this stuff. And it's more of it's honestly, I hate to use the word performative, but it can lead to performative when there's no relationship.
Right. And those kinds of things, in my experience, and I think that this is true in our most intimate relationships, and it's true in political community, that when we are relying on performative gestures instead of the actual relational material, that's because of fear, right? That's because we're moving from fear. So I confront this a lot in my most intimate relationships when it's like, oh, you're doing that thing because you're afraid of the truth, or you're afraid of being wrong, or you're afraid of loss, or you're afraid of something, and that's causing you to perform in a certain way. And that, again, I'm thinking about like, what are the energies that are actually toxic to us that make it really hard for us to act courageously and act meaningfully? So the question that Adrian and I have been asking on our show this last season, the solidarity season, is like, what can you do that you will do? It's a very simple question, but it's very hard to answer, because you have to really think about like, what is within my sphere of influence to do, to act, to affect, and then what do I have the will to do, right? And that, to answer that question requires us to like courageously look at how much fear is influencing how we behave, And for me, it's just been so provocative and such good medicine to really look at myself and be like, yeah, what can I do? I can do a lot of things, but what will I do? What am I willing to do? What risk am I willing to take? Am I willing to be in the discomfort of knowing that I just might be wrong about 90% of the things that I believe?
Head explodes.
Right? Because as you said at the very top of this conversation, we really like to think that we're right here on the left side of the spectrum. And I mean, actually, it's funny. One of the last episodes that we put out on our podcast was with Rebecca Solnit. And she was talking about how even the left-right framing, I'm not even going to get this right because I was blown away by this. She was like, that comes from like the French Revolutionary period. It's like ancient.
Oh, wow.
She was like, it's not even a relevant way to talk about, it's not a useful way of framing what our political spectrum even looks like right now. For me, it's the language that I have, so I'm continuing to use it, but I've been thinking about that ever since I spoke to her. That I'm like, I'm out here using really outdated language to describe the political spectrum. And, how is that strategic?
I think one thing that's coming up for me, and this is like going really deep here, so we'll see if this goes, but I'm curious for your thoughts on, do you think that everyone in the world, like all humans, all beings, are like fundamentally good at their core? Or do you feel like there's evil? Or because I feel like one of the reason I ask this is like, it feels like one of the challenges that we face on this new spectrum that we're not calling left or right is that there's really a belief like these other people are really operating from a place of like hate and like evilness.
Yeah.
And I guess I worry about a mindset that doesn't include like that we're all actually good at our core, at our root, because it means you can sort of like, you can cut people off and just be like, this is a bad person. And like, and even if like separate from boundaries, right? Like, even though you might be good at your core, I definitely don't want to talk to you.
Right,
like, so it's not like we have to be friends with everyone.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, is what I'm saying actually scary, or like, is it resonate, or like, because I feel like it changes how we approach other people and like everyone in the world. If we're like, actually at your core, you're good. You just have a lot of confusion, or who am I to judge? Maybe I have the confusion, but.
Oh, I love this question. It's such a good question, especially right now when we are actively in the process of like witnessing truly evil acts. I take the position that humans are neither fundamentally good nor fundamentally bad. In recent years, I have found that the thing that is a very useful way, and this is just for me, I'm not advocating for this, but I'm just giving it as an example of like a different frame through which to imagine what we're dealing with. For me, it has been helpful to think about it as there are some people who are on earth to break generational curses, and there are some people who are on earth to carry them. And when you are carrying a curse, that looks like a lot of bad behavior. It can look like I'm doing evil in the world, right? It can look like I'm lost and confused. It can look like I am drinking myself to death. It can look like I'm ruining other people's lives with my totally dysregulated behavior, right? Like it doesn't have to be at a macro scale of I'm engaging in genocidal behavior against a whole people. It can be at the micro scale of like I'm really ruining the lives of people around me because I can't get a hold of myself, right? To me, that's all on the sort of same spectrum of like I'm carrying a generational curse and it's not necessarily my work in this lifetime to be able to break it. Someone else's work in this lifetime to break the curse. So that just personally for me, and again, I'm like just reached a point, it's part of my midlife, like entering the second half of my life, really thinking about my legacy, really thinking about the fact that I'm going to die someday. Like, so I am thinking about like, what are the most beneficial ways to think about these big questions? Because it's not about, for me, it's not about whether my ideas are right or wrong. I'm really looking at it as, what is the most beneficial way to think about this so that I can take right action? And I know that if I think about someone as evil, I can't take right action in relationship to them because I'm either going to be afraid of them or I'm going to want to destroy them. But if I imagine that someone is carrying a curse, I relate really differently to that because I'm like, ooh, I have to have a strategy for this, or ooh, like I think about this in terms of generational timelines. Like, when we're talking about healing intergenerational patterns, like I think about how often families talk about like addiction work, that, it's rare for someone in a family system to be an addict and to have not had an addict parent, an addict grandparent. You know what I mean? It's like, it's generationally passed, that tendency. And so oftentimes when people are doing work around addiction, they're thinking about it as like, I'm doing this work both on my behalf and on behalf of my family line, on behalf of all the people who could not do it, right? So that's kind of a linear way to think about it. So sometimes for me, it's like taking that like vertical line and making it horizontal and saying like, okay, what if it's not that like this curse is being passed down? What if the curse is being carried across like multiple people in communities? And there's some of us whose job is to be like, oh no, the curse is coming. And Harry Potter that shit. You know what I mean? Or pick your fantastical avatar. But it's like, yeah, I would just rather be Hermione. You know what I mean? I don't want to be cowering in a corner. I don't want to be turned to the dark side. I want to be someone who feels a sense of agency to solve the problem and act from like courageous values. And so for me, it's helpful to think about it in those, it's kind of like a good and evil is epic too. This is like a different sort of epic framing. You know what I'm saying?
Have you heard of the concept of most generous interpretation?
I don't think I have.
So it comes from parenting, like, and it's at least how I heard about it. And so one example would be like my kid comes home, a younger kid, and like they just want ice cream for dinner. And you're like, how disrespectful of you. That would be like a least generous interpretation. A most generous interpretation might be like, like they just want to be able to choose what food goes in their body. Like they don't have like agency to choose what food goes in, so you're actually like being generous. And so I've tried to apply it to like political situations in life where you see something happening, like why would Trump do this? And it's like, okay, well, what's a most generous interpretation? So you're actually like, you're trying to get at like maybe it's not necessarily the real reasons, but you're at least like giving space to like, there's more to what my initial reaction was that's like driving this. It's not just like he's evil. It's like, oh, maybe he feels like a lot of pressure from like this one constituency that like has a lot of power in his group, and he like, I don't know. But it doesn't mean you forgive the behavior. It's not like, okay, Trump did this, and so like the most generous interpretation, I understand it, I'm not going to say anything. But it actually makes you more effective in your response, because you were talking about like, how do I be really effective in certain situations? And so if we're able to give people like the most generous interpretation, the benefit of the doubt, the like, I'm really like forcing myself to think beyond just the gut level responses, then maybe my reaction or how I react to the situation can be more effective because I've considered these things.
That's really interesting. I think it's hard for me to think about. I think maybe it's the language of generosity that it's like I'm receiving what you're saying, and I'm feeling challenged to even think about that in relationship to like Trump or in relationship like to the state of Israel, because I feel like I'm like, oh, there's no way that I can't filter genocide through that lens. But what I can filter it through is the lens of like, what do I need to understand about the worldview that's operative here? Right? So the most generous interpretation framework for me feels like it really works at an interpersonal level. But if I'm thinking in terms of, I'm just speaking for myself, when I'm thinking in terms of like these big sort of political systems levels, then it helps me more, I think, to think about it as like, what do I need to understand about the worldview that's operative here? What is the role that like fear, isolation, and destruction are like playing inside of the worldview? Like what is sort of I think maybe similar to the way that you find that the most generous interpretation framework useful. I think the thing that feels useful to me about the worldview framework is that it supports me getting to that place of like, right, and then how do I act in a way that's effective in relationship to that? How do I act in a way that's strategic in relationship to that? In a way, because it's like it requires me to depersonalize the thing that's happening, because if we're in the good evil framework, it's by its nature, it's like comparative, right? And it's distancing. It's like if I'm assigning that as evil, I'm kind of by default assigning myself as good in that scenario, right? And I'm distancing myself. Whereas if I'm thinking about it through the most generous interpretation framework, I'm having to draw on empathy in order to imagine myself into the other person's circumstances. Or if I'm thinking about it through the worldview framework, I'm having to just recognize that there's multiple belief systems that are operative.
Well, maybe
that's a juicy one.
Yeah, it's juicy. Well, I was wondering if in the last like 10 minutes or so, are you willing to speak about your book, or is it like sort of under wraps a little bit?
I can try to talk about it. I mean, I'm like,
or maybe just like, the concept of fugitive. I'm not sure I know for sure not everyone knows what that means.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the circle back is everyone should read Alexis Pauline Gumbs, actually.
Yeah.
She's brilliant, and she's one of my heroes. But I'm saying that everyone should read her because I genuinely think you should read her, not because you should read her in order to feel included in the movement. Right. But she's absolutely one of my inspirations in terms of work on fugitivity. But yeah, so I can say, my shorthand sort of like elevator pitch for like, what is this book about? It's about how do we practice freedom in an unfree world? And fugitivity is, so I'll start with what is a fugitive, right? A fugitive is someone who is on the run, who is escaping capture, who is evading surveillance in order to keep themselves free. That's what a fugitive is. We often think about the term in terms of like in relationship to criminals, quote unquote. But I want people to think about this terminology more in relationship to the time space of enslavement and the landscape of the plantation and the ways that people had to make themselves fugitive from the plantation and make themselves fugitive from the system of enslavement. To, another way of thinking about it is like if you think about how under conditions of enslavement, people were considered property, the fugitive is the person who steals themselves, right? They're engaging in an act of theft, but the thing that they're stealing is their own body, and they're taking it away from the system, right? So I find this to be an incredibly powerful metaphor for what it is that we are actually trying to do right now as we are trying to figure out a way to freedom. Because, okay, yeah, we're not inside the time space of enslavement. We're not, most of us, on plantations. But our whole society is built on, well, one, it was like created on the conditions of enslavement and genocide. And I would say that both the mechanics of the plantation and the roles, those things are still very much alive in our society. And they really shape our lives. One of the arguments that I'm making inside of the book is that for those of us who live in American society specifically, we live in a society that is fundamentally violent in the way that it's shaped. And in order to be functional inside of that society, a lot of us have to walk around in kind of a fugue state, like a state where we're pretty dissociated. We're not super in touch with what is actually happening. And that's a survival strategy. The fugitive has to really be awake and alert. The fugitive has to have a sense of agency over their own body. And they don't have to know where they are, but they do have to trust that they can find their way, right? And so for me, the practice of fugitivity is a practice of wayfinding. And it's about really releasing the idea that I have to know where I'm going or I have to know how to get there. It's about developing and conditioning a sense of trust with myself to find my way and find my way with others. That is how I'm going to practice freedom right now. Because the system is literally everywhere. It's not like there's a place to go to. There's not there's nowhere to go that's not under racial capitalism at this time, which means that we ourselves have to be the places where we are practicing freedom. So that's what the book is about.
Wow.
Does that sound like a book that you would want to read?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It does. I mean, this is a sort of maybe naive question, but it's is there space in that is it primarily for folks who identify as Black, or is it also, yeah? It's
for everyone. Yeah. It's definitely drawing on Black freedom movements and Black liberation lineages, but it's drawing on other things too. Frankly, a lot of what I'm drawing on in the book is martial arts.
Oh.
Practice. Yeah. It's not an Aikido book, but it's very inspired by my experience of becoming a martial artist and learning how to fight, because learning how to use my body in that way really changed the way that I relate to the world around me and how I relate to conflict, how I relate to violence, all of those things. So
when did you start the Aikido? How long ago?
4 years ago. 4 years ago. And 4 years in, I'm still a beginner, very much a beginner. Our practice, it's you never stop really being a student. But I consider it to be one of my vocations. And I train 5 days a week in my dojo. I'm a very serious little student. And so I'm drawing on a bunch of different things. And I really hope that white people will find themselves in the audience of this work, because the dissociation of white people, the dissociation of white people is extremely dangerous. And also it's the mutual dissociation of white people and people of color is part of how we find ourselves in this cycle. So for me, part of my waking up process was waking up to the dissociation of white people and realizing that it is not useful for me to walk around in the world and act like every white person I encounter has more power than me. especially if I'm the person who's more awake and more aware and more in tune with what's actually going on in the relationship or in the exchange or in the interaction. So I really literally went through a process of like flipping my entire script on how I interact with white people. Even though I'm a woman of color and a queer woman of color and a single mother, like I could list out all of my identities that would put me on the margins of society. But if I'm being real with you, Ryan, I relate to myself as an incredibly powerful person. I don't walk into relationships with white people being like, oh my God, they have more power than me. Like that's not how I relate to white people. I relate to white people in my family, in my friend groups, and beyond, strangers, as, you know, other humans who are inside this dissociated space and have the capacity to become dangerous, which I have to look out for, but are not fundamentally carrying more power than me. And even that shift has like totally changed my life. You know, just that psychic shift of not cowering. You know?
And I love how martial arts was. So I actually started boxing like 3 months ago for the first time.
Awesome.
Because I don't know if it's like you, where it's like, we liberals don't do physical martial art things or violent things. Like, that's not what we do. We read books.
We read books and we go for jogs.
I was like, I have a lot of rage that needs to come out, and it's like not working, just doing yoga and like calming things. I need to hit things.
Yes.
And so
Ryan, yes.
I'm on the same page as you. Like, I feel like, because I remember you did a podcast episode maybe 4 years ago, and I don't know your decision on this, but you were interviewing someone about like, should I buy a gun or not?
Yes,
and like,
totally.
And I don't know if you did or not, but I'm glad you like also went the Aikido way, you know? So
yes,
it's like,
yes, totally. You know? Yeah. Something had to happen. Yeah. Oh, it's funny to think about, because that was the 2020 Apocalypse miniseries. We were having the conversations about that. I interviewed, Rashid McCall about
the tools. Yeah.
About gun ownership in the Black community specifically, and about the idea of like arming ourselves as a part of liberation. It was and that conversation wasn't even actually about me. It was more about like, how do we disrupt this idea that our strategy has to be nonviolent? He and other Black liberatory organizers really helped offer me that reframe of like, when you live inside of a fundamentally violent society where violence is constantly being projected onto Black people, the frame of nonviolence is actually kind of a misnomer, because anything you do is perceived as violent, right? And so I remember in that interview, he talked about how he was like, Martin Luther King Jr. was practicing nonviolent organizing strategy, and he was armed, as were all of his contemporaries, because they had to protect themselves, you know? So it's like, we have to get beyond this sort of, again, rigid binary way of thinking about it's either this or that. And for me, Aikido has been such a powerful way of practicing that, because in Aikido, everything that we do, every technique is about harmonizing with violence, neutralizing aggression. You know, it's not about like destroying the other person. It's about blending with the attack, right? And in order to blend with the attack, you have to become really familiar with what it is to attack someone. So it's a partner-based practice. So you literally take turns attacking each other and then blending.
Wow.
So, right? So it's beautiful. It's like a beautiful, very physically intense form. And it's been for me, because I'm similar to you. I have a lot of anger, and I'm a fighter. Like, I am a fighter just as a person. And so, like, if you're thinking about the trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, like, I'm a fighter. I'm not a freezer, and I'm not a fleer. I'm a fucking fighter. I'm like, you push me into a corner, just know that your neck will get cut open. Like, that is, I'm kind of scary in that way. But it's been good for me to like have a practice that helps me integrate that about myself in a way that is healthy, so that I can become. A lot of Aikido is based on, pretty much all of Aikido is based on sword forms. And so we often are like thinking about our bodies as an extension of a sword. And so you're always having to think about like, how do you make a clean cut instead of a messy cut? And it's been for me a helpful metaphor for life, or like, I might have to make a cut. How do I make a clean cut? You know what I mean? How do I not create a whole mess here, but really just do what is necessary? Just what's necessary. No more, no less, you know?
Well, this is awesome. We could have a whole martial arts sub-discussion, which I
love knowing that you got into boxing. I can't wait to like check in with you a year from now and hear how it's going. Yeah.
Maybe jujitsu at some point.
Do it. You won't regret it.
Well, I know we got to get you out of here so you can plan your child's birthday party. Do you want to drop any like links or like any things coming up that folks should know about, listeners?
Yeah, that's great. So I would just say if people want to follow my work, my website is iambrown.org. And there's a place on my website where you can like sign up for my newsletter, and which I send out like once every 3 months or something. I'm not very active on it. You can follow me on social media on Instagram at Autumn Megan Brown. And you can listen to my podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, which you can find literally anywhere that podcasts are promoted. Yeah, I think that those are the ways to find me. My music is on all the streaming platforms under the name Autumn, all caps. And I just always encourage people, just reach out. Like if you're curious about these ideas and you're like, I want to understand this more, I want to know where to go to find more information about it, hit me up through the form on my website or DM me on Instagram. Like I am always happy to respond to a request that's like rooted in curiosity and learning.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, Autumn. Well, thank you so much for joining, and we'll have you on for number 4 at some point.
Yeah, we totally will. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
The deepest takeaway has just been this much more felt sense of possibility and clarity. We deserve this better world, and we're living it now. And when we work together, we have so much power, and there's just so much capacity for really beautiful transformation in like the home, in the workplace, in community spaces, in learning spaces. So I'm really, really glad that I chose to sign up.
You just heard from Emily, a graduate of the Next Economy MBA. If you're interested in creating an organization or vocation that aligns with a world that works for all life, we'd love to have you join our fall cohort beginning September 30th. Our 9-month program is designed to provide an accessible introduction to business and organizational fundamentals from a just and regenerative perspective, based on our work with over 300 social enterprises and 700 alumni who are transforming communities around the world. Learn more and sign up for a free intro session at lifteconomy.com/MBA. Plus, save 20% on tuition through August 11th during our early bird sale. Thanks for listening, and now onto the show.